However, I wanted to ask also about the big topic, and this the generative AI.
Yeah.
And we just had a guest recently, or actually last episode, where we were discussing how if you basically feed this generative AI with event logs, you will probably design much better processes. So it would be sort of I don't want to call it simulation. It would be more like creating perfect processes out of your historical data. So there's this prediction on what you should actually do. Um, where do you see the difference between taking this and generating the processes from scratch with just inputting your historical data and the actual simulation that you guys are doing?
So I'm glad you brought this topic up because we've done a ton of thinking internally. I've done a lot of thinking about like the implications of generative AI in business processes and obviously for simulation as well. And I've got to a point. And I've not really heard anyone talking about this in the ecosystem. Potentially that's because I'm mad. But I think I have an interesting take on this, which is what generative AI is fantastic for is generating. Like we can all agree on that. And I saw this first. I was like everyone else. I got super excited when GPT 3.5 and then GPT 4 came out and was playing with it and playing with text. And what you realize is it generates fantastic looking text until you really understand the topic, and then you start to see the cracks in it, and you realize it's not quite as good as I thought, which led me to the conclusion that the hard part is not generating now. That's solved. The hard part is evaluating. Is it good or not? And so, what I think is so interesting about what we're doing and the promise of simulation here is, if I can now generate a million different processes arbitrarily, the question is now, well, are any of them any good? And the beauty of the simulation is it tells me if something is good or not. So what we're doing today, what transformation teams are doing today, is generating solutions. How am I gonna change this process, and am I gonna fix a problem? And we might generate 5 or 10, right? And that might take a long time, and we're drawing them on whiteboards, and we're discussing things, and there's lots of work going on to generate potential solutions. I think what's really interesting, and we've prototyped this, and it can be done. You can generate new process structures with parameters using generative AI. You can feed those through a simulation platform like Silico, and it will tell you, for all of those million ideas you might want to generate, which one is going to have the most impact on the business.
Mhm.
So the generation part's solved. The simulation solves the evaluation part. The only hard part is to tell is to tell the computer what is possible in the world. And the bit that I think is really going to be the really interesting bit, and we've got some, I think, very interesting ideas here, is how do you ensure that what the AI is going to generate as a solution is actually a plausible thing that could be implemented in the real world? And the way you do this, I think, is you feed it enough examples of things that are plausible changes in the world. So, um, I think there's a very interesting thing that we want to build that sits on top of Silico, which will, eventually, instead of the human doing the generation of the solutions and the simulation doing the evaluation, we can put that all in a loop, and we can have that done by the computer. Um, I've seen some very interesting stuff as well around using it to sort of help with the explainability of process models and processes as well. But I do think this thing of generating new processes is the interesting angle. And simulate, if you haven't got a simulation framework, you're stuffed, because you can generate as much text as you like. You've got no idea if it's good or not.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I've encountered this when asking ChatGPT for like code examples as I was learning a new language or something, and it was like, yeah, just use these functions, and then your problems are solved. And then I tried using them; they don't exist, of course. It just thought that they existed, and it's okay, cool. Gives
Yeah.
me a good idea of what it should be, but I guess these things don't exist, so I'm not going to do this. And same in the generating process models. I can imagine that, well, if you want to increase customer happiness, have you considered the activity increase customer happiness? Yeah, maybe, sure.
Easy.
Thanks for that. So but there are some things that it can generate that might not exist yet but are technically feasible. Activities that haven't been considered, or automations in places for activities that don't exist, and we're feeding it things that only exist in the space that we're giving it. So is that like a bit of a problem? Like we have very like that's a structural problem back then, right?
So I think the thing that's hard that's yet to be solved, that I think I certainly have some ideas of how this gets solved, and maybe there's a future podcast I'll come back on and tell you I've solved it. But I think there is an outstanding challenge to be solved technically around ensuring that it generates valid processes, not just processes. The thing that the idea it has for an automation is a legitimate thing that could be automated, or the change in a parameter value is something that is a lever you could plausibly pull and get to that setting in the organization. It doesn't say put 3 million people on process step 2. Obviously, that's not the plausible setting. So I think there's a piece around, can it generate processes? Absolutely, it can generate as many processes you want. It's fantastic at that. Can Silico evaluate if those processes are good or not? Absolutely, it can do that. A bit in the middle is, are those things it suggested, are those, like your code example, are those actually valid functions? Are those actually valid things? And I think what it needs to be fed with is a set of a big rich database of plausible things that it can change, lots of examples. And you'd start this, what we'd like to do, I think, is to start this in one common widespread process that you see in every organization. You would build up, if you were to build up a set of examples of the possible ways it could be changed, the AI would be able to generate those for you, and they would be plausible. But unless you've got the simulation, you're not going to be able to work out if they're good or not. So
Right.
yeah, it's I think it's very, very exciting. I think there'll be something very interesting to show, in months, certainly next year.
Patrick, I'm not sure about you, but I love how basically every new angle of thinking about processes, and the simulation being one of those, is just and widening the horizons on how you even think about these problems.
Yeah.
Because there are some things I haven't thought about just yet. So this is very, very interesting.